case of active, the individual is actually synthesizing the antibodies. Memory cells are present. So on a second or third or fourth exposure, they're going to be able to continue making antibodies.
So if we get flu shots, is it just for like a temporary amount of time? Like, is it if we're
Hold on,
sick?
and you'll see.
Okay.
Then we have natural. So we can have natural passive or we can have natural active. All right? Natural means the exposure occurred without artificial means. Okay? So exposure is due to natural causes. Talk about circular reasoning. And acquired, I would use the word artificial, but then you're going to put artificial passive instead of acquired passive, all right? But acquired is exposure is unnatural. How's that? It usually involves needles.
Did you say beetles?
Needles. Beetles, I'm afraid, would be natural. All right, so let's look at some examples. So here is passive, natural. The only examples of passive, natural are in infants. Well, I suppose that, the 15-year-old person breastfeeding, it would be passive, but I'm not sure that we see that too often. So across the placenta, across the amniotic membrane with IgG antibodies, or breastfeeding with IgA. So after the baby is born, if it's not breastfeeding, those antibodies are going to be gone within 3 to 5 months. Okay? And again, the same thing. When the baby stops breastfeeding, the IgA antibodies it got from the mother will be gone in 3 to 5 months, 3 to 4 months. So the baby has no memory cells. And once those antibodies are cleared from its bloodstream, it would no longer have immunity if that was all the immunity was based on. Passive because the baby didn't make the antibodies. Natural because being born is a natural process. And we still consider breastfeeding to be a natural process. Okay? All right, passive acquired. Again, you have to get the antibodies from outside the body via an injection. So the RhoGAM shot, we're giving the mother antibodies against the D antigen in order to prevent her from having the primary immune response. And in giving the anti-snake venom serum, it's not that we're trying to keep the person from having the immune response. We don't have time to wait for that. All right, we don't have time to wait a week to get a few antibodies, but then the destructive properties of the toxin would already have their effect. Yes?
So would the RhoGAM shot be given constantly, or?
Every time the woman is pregnant,
Oh,
because they wouldn't last from one pregnancy to the next. In fact, they're given several times during the pregnancy nowadays. So when I was an undergraduate back east, I went my junior year to a hospital close to my home where I'd already graduated from my RN program. So I was a junior, but the hospital was like within walking distance. So I moved home to work at the hospital and continue my college program. And by walking distance, so if this was the biology department, the hospital would be where the library is. All right. So one of the professors there kept venomous snakes, and he was rather casual in handling them. And he'd get bitten by a rattlesnake, and he'd walk across to the ER and get an anti-venom serum injection. And the next year he'd get bitten again and walk across, okay, I'm here for my shot. So he had to get a shot each time. But the serum and the antibodies were raised in non-humans, and the clotting proteins had been removed. That's why it was serum and not plasma, but there were other proteins. And with these repeated injections, he developed a sensitivity and raised antibodies against those other proteins. So it got to the point where he developed hypersensitivity to those proteins, and the doctors finally said, we can't give this to you anymore because it could cause an anaphylactic shock. And he had to quit his snake handling. Because if he'd gotten bitten, the anti-snake venom serum could have killed him as much as the toxin itself. Right?
Professor,
Yes.
why is it when you're bit by a black widow, you can only be given the antivenom once?
I don't know. I wasn't aware of that.
Yeah, you can only have it once.
I didn't know they
in a
even
lifetime.
gave it because it's really not fatal. In children, it can make them really sick, but it's not like as much like the brown recluse or something. I don't know why. Probably for that reason, that there's something within that venom that causes you to produce immediately enough of an immune response that would be worse than the venom the next time. I'm assuming that would probably be the reason. Okay, active natural immunity. So here's a little baby. I turn the lights off, has chicken pox. It's not a little baby, but a toddler. Oh, a particular type of antibody?
Yes.
It's usually IgG. All right, so now active means that your own lymphocytes have been exposed to the antigen, have been activated via that T helper system, and you have memory cells present in your body, so you actually got sick, even if mildly. When my oldest son got chicken pox, he really had only 2 of these little pustules present on his bottom, okay? And we had been at spring training in Arizona, and on the way back, we stopped at my sister-in-law's in Fresno, and he had a high fever, not really real high, but he was sick in the drive on the way back. And so the next morning, I was just, basically getting him changed almost in the dark, and happened to see 2 of those little pustules. So I don't know how many kids at the ballpark he got sick when he had his fever. And he wasn't really sick. It just kept me from going to Phantom of the Opera that night. But by the time the twins came along, they got a chickenpox vaccine. Okay? But they both, all 3 of them have their own antibodies now. Just that the kids would have been the next one that we have, which I'll show you in a second. So my oldest son has active natural, because he got sick. He got exposed to the virus naturally.
We were talking about this the other day, but Lloyd and I have never had chicken pox. Let's say I actually had a son and he got chicken pox.
You would be very sick if you got it.
Tell me about it. Yeah, I got it.
My dad got it when he was 30, and it's like having your tonsils out when you're older. It's much easier to do it as a child. Which in reference to this, why they have these chickenpox parties with the people that don't want vaccinations. I mean, for a while, that you could see online, they would give a child who had chickenpox a lollipop to lick, and then for $50, they'll mail it to you. And you can give it to your child to lick and see if they get chickenpox. It's just weird, yeah. So, all right, so this is active natural. Active because the person actually is exposed to the antigen, to their B cells and T cells, activate the B cells, memory cells are formed, so the next time they're exposed, they produce the antibodies very rapidly and don't get sick. Okay? Natural, because they weren't given a vaccination. So that's our active acquired immunity.
Oh my gosh.
Okay?
That's a brutal picture.
So sometimes the exposure is via nasal spray, depending on whether the virus is dead or just weakened. Sometimes, it could be, I got my polio vaccinations by sucking on a sugar cube that had the virus on it. So here, it's active, you're still exposed to the antigen, you still have the memory cells that have responded, but your exposure was artificial, okay? You were given an external source via an injection or the nasal spray. Okay? So if I give you some of these examples on the exam, match them to the proper active, passive, active, acquired, not active, passive, active, acquired, active, natural, passive, acquired, passive, natural.
Okay.
I'm sure it's photoshopped, but it's cute.
Looks like Mark McGuire at
With all the steroids. Okay. We're done. So that last page on hypersensitivities, I won't ask you any questions on. And on the very last page of your lecture, ooh, that was cross it down.
Yeah, I know, I did up there too, but I just wanted to make myself sure.
Okay.
Always died if anything.
So, yes.
So the last page, do we worry about consent?
Let's